Maybe a good place to start is I always like to kind of do the who you are, like how you describe yourself, whatever. So yeah, who are you and what do you do?
Oh, that's a good
It's a
question.
broad
Maybe the
one.
hardest one, or the hardest one today. My name is Garen Morgan. I'm a partner, and I work predominantly in our financial services group. So I work with banks and common trust funds, investment funds, investment broker dealers, um, and my relationship with crypto has been very much an enthusiast and someone who looked at something that was new and emerging and saw something very powerful about it. I am, when it comes to what I trade and how I, transact in it, I'm probably very basic. The things that interest me about it are the audit factors, what I see happening for our clients, what I see the potential to be to business. And so that's pretty much where my focus is. And so I take a very broad perspective on a lot of different things, a lot of different industries when I look at it, not just my own. So so that's kind of me and my relationship with crypto and digital assets right now.
Yeah, that's a great perspective to come from. Like you sound you're just curious and trying to
Yeah.
solve a problem that's coming through. So I am curious though, like the clients that you work with, are you
Mhm.
seeing many of them utilizing it? Has it kind of been increasing? What's the trend there that you're seeing?
So the trend for me is coming through predominantly in the community banking and large community bank arena because that's who I work with the most.
Okay.
And they are getting into this space to be a custodian, to facilitate transactions of their customers. This whole holistic idea of finance where I can log into my banking app. Not only can I monitor my cash holdings at a bank, but I can also, through that app or through that bank, trade crypto or trade equities or do something like that. So I have a lot of clients picking that up, creating these custodial relationships with a well known exchange and facilitating their customers' needs and desires to participate in these. I think they're mainstream now, but they weren't maybe a year ago in these other investment diversity opportunities. So,
Yeah, so it's kind of the same thing, right? They see a need and they're trying to help facilitate
yeah.
that for their clients, right?
Well, and as we all will struggle with throughout our life, relevance.
Hmm. Hmm.
So maintaining their position in the financial payment system and maintaining their position in a ever changing and ever evolving investment world and financial world. So that's what they're seeing. And at the same time, banks are known as kind of the bad guy by a lot of people that are in this crypto world um, as an intermediary. We don't want an intermediary there. So I think there is still something very appealing about an intermediary, and that is that they provide some sense of security. And so this, I think, creates a platform for even those that are a little bit less likely to spin up a node in their basement and start, running their own blockchain, to be a part of this environment and to be a part of digital assets. And so I think it creates a lot of different outlets, a lot of things that are cool. And other industries that I speak to and that I talk with, the healthcare industry is very interested in this because of the blockchain side of it and not necessarily the crypto side of it. You've got the governmental nonprofit groups that are very interested in it because people want to donate their crypto. And so you see that coming through our or NPO groups, our nonprofit groups. And so, of course, our tax side, as Nick covered probably so very well, is coming through too. So, as a firm and holistically in what we do, we are seeing it quite often come through in a lot of different ways.
You mentioned kind of your interest in coming at it too, Frank, from the audit and the financial statement side. So I
Yeah.
guess what are some of the considerations or maybe challenges with digital assets from an auditing perspective?
Yeah. So, just to name a few, we're
Like, where do
going
you want me to
from,
start?
yeah, exactly. Starting to look and depend on completely electronic records as opposed to having something, a hard copy of something to audit to. And I know that hard copy is very old and antiquated at this point. Most things we get are exchanged electronically. It's a PDF of something. But we're talking about straight electronic records on a blockchain, right? Instead of having that piece of paper, quote unquote, these days. Um, when you get to things like valuation, so if it's held as an asset, um, for some of these tokens, lack of a observable market, so you really may not be able to go out and price it. I mean, A Bitcoin, yes, you can, but we see investment funds and some of these other types of entities holding more obscure tokens and holding things that may not represent a token yet. So they may have an agreement for a future token. So how do you create these valuation models for those items? A lot of what we do in auditing when we look at estimates, or which fair value is an estimate, and when we look at some of the testing mechanisms we've used, they're built on historical data. We don't have that here. We don't have a lot of historical data for all of these environments. And then really digging in and understanding the third parties that are involved in the environment. So the exchanges, not only the domestic based, but the international based exchanges. And so if my client is out transacting, instead of having their own personal wallet, they transact on an exchange and use that type of a wallet environment, then what do I know about this exchange? And how do I know about what's happening out there with the money that's coming in and out? So that's just the tip of the iceberg. Outside of that, it's record keeping in general, and how does a blockchain and exchange environment interface with my GL? So it's very very interesting and informative at this point in trying to get those assertions, those audit assertions, hit correctly, and design procedures based on the type of digital asset to address them. Because that's the other thing we run into is when we go through discussions with clients, is really trying to figure out what are we going to audit. That's the other side of it too. That's a little bit more difficult than normal.
I'm sure internal controls play a big factor in there, right? And how that's you're designing the procedure and whatnot and what you're auditing. So I guess, can you speak to that and some of the considerations on the internal control side?
Internal controls for me, I go back to the old COSO framework. So whatever control framework you're working on, if you don't have one, COSO is the closest thing. It's what most public companies run off of right now. And so I look to what's my risk, and then what's my control to address the risk, and it goes on from there. I mean, these are built out into gigantic matrices that do an analysis and ultimately design a control in order to address the risks. So of course, we're going to start with what are the risks related to crypto. I mean, when you look at that at a high level, I think number one is understandability. Really, so how do we understand what we have and what's our governance structure around that? And are we making policy decisions in the correct way? And are we evaluating these things under the correct risk profile and governance profile in our entity? The risks here are very broad. And so you can see how you may have a couple of different aspects to that governance structure that you need to approach. From the control activity level, just some things I went through and made myself some notes as I brainstorm on this, but one of the huge things is protection of private keys. So my wallet, what's the security protocols around my wallet, and making sure that I have controls there. If I have a internal wallet, am I keeping that locked? Is it under dual controls? Some of the more basic things there. If I've got a wallet on a exchange, or on an external exchange or a hot wallet, am I keeping the passwords and protocols, essentially private keys, close to the vest there, and do I have controls around those? Reconciliations are always going to be big. And so how am I reconciling what my asset trade volume is, or what my asset is, into my financials? Compliance is also a big one that you start to think of. It's not necessarily 100% internal control, but I think it's important to consider the compliance concerns related to Know Your Customer, Bank Secrecy Act, and how the government and other legal structures are reacting to that right now, and consider that in a control framework. What are my controls over those types of things? And then you've just got things like data integrity and in legal regulatory risk. So all of those being the subsets of risks that you would address, and then design controls in your organization in order to address those matters.
Okay. Are you seeing maybe any, I don't want to, because there's two ways to look at this question, to say, okay, are there best practices to making sure you're doing that well, or are there common things that people maybe are leaving unaddressed when designing internal controls around digital assets?
I have to be honest, I haven't seen too much of it in action. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It really hasn't been it hasn't hit our client base to the point where we see a consistent control structure designed around it. Um, Everybody is kind of finding their way through it right now. So I know there are some public companies out there that have probably dug into this a little bit more, but really for what I've seen, I haven't seen anything consistent at this point.
Sure. Yeah. No. Which I imagine is also consistent with many companies because they're just trying to wrap their arms around it, right? And you know, what's the future with all this? And maybe with that in mind, I know there was an announcement pretty recently here from the White House, and maybe there's more to come. But what's happening there, and maybe what does that mean from your perspective for, I guess, the future potentially of digital assets?
And I trace this back even, late 2021 when the Senate Banking Committee started having conversations about crypto. And so that was the first kind of sign to me that, like, hey, they're going to legitimize this. Because the reception in that banking committee was very positive. And the discussion was more of a how do we regulate this from an intelligent and concise manner? And do we need to form a separate agency or do we need to house this under banking? So it was almost like they were progressing in their thought past the idea of, is this a real thing? So what I think we saw in the last couple of weeks, maybe, Biden's executive order related to crypto digital assets, directing the parties that be within the federal government to come up with a plan and policy for digital assets, with the intentions of making sure that consumers are protected and that there is financial stability in this environment. And I think this is great. I Every time I do a speaking event or every time I talk about crypto, the $1 trillion asset level is there of the volume of trading that's happening every day. And so if you think about how much money is wrapped up in just that line in those transactions every day, I do think there's a need to protect people. I mean, because this isn't just, your experimental traders anymore. These are people with retirement plans. These are people that have, an idea of what they want to do in their future. And the reason why the federal banking system is set up and the reason why the federal government gets involved in those things is to protect people. So I think that's a great way to start the journey that politics and crypto would go about together, kind of thing. And so, you have a couple other things in there. He's talking about financial inclusion, and he's also talking about responsible innovation in the executive order. But, you know, the facts and circumstances of what the White House put out about it, where we're giving crypto a thumbs up, we're going to legitimize it, and we're going to put rules in place to protect the people that are investing it. Now, there's some other politics that surrounded that, and what generated the need for that to come to the forefront now. And probably most people are aware of what's happening in Ukraine and the sanctions that were placed on the Russian government. And so when those sanctions went through, it blew up in the digital asset world of, well, here's your business case for where some illicit activity may, or the illicit activity in the domestic mindset. This is where Russia can go around the payment systems that are out there. They can start using Bitcoin in order to transact and keep their money moving through the environment. You've also seen that on the other side. You've seen Ukraine receiving digital assets in order to help them keep their financial system moving. So I think it was spurred on by trying to maintain the sanctions in place that Biden had tried to structure. But it was something that was coming anyway in my mind. So either way, it's good. And I think we will see the benefits of this, not only as investors in the digital assets markets and in the development of our economic system, but I also think that we will see it just from the health of our financial system with crypto and digital assets incorporated into it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like you said, it's no small thing anymore, really, right? So I'm going to go really broad on you here and just say,
Okay.
what else would you maybe include in the conversation here? I know there's, like you said, we're like just scratching the surface, just the tip of the iceberg. But what are some other things that you think are helpful to those that are trying to figure out and make sense of the whole world of digital assets?
Digital assets can be anything. And I think that's important to know that you are not expected to know exactly what an NFT is. You are not expected to know exactly what a crypto is. Due diligence, my friends, making sure that you're aware of what it is and that you're protecting the assets that you're putting into place. This is any other investment. It's going to be there's going to be a continual period of volatility there, but there are also some more illicit activities connected to it. And so being aware and being a smart participant in this environment. So that's my number one. That's where, I want people to be involved in this environment. I think it's exciting. I think it is an evolution that we have seen in our lifetime and that will grow and become even more business purposed in the future. But at this stage, being very smart about what we don't know. And then, the other side, you look at some of these things that evolved, like NFTs. So NFTs came out, and I think if you talk to most experts these days, you can anybody becomes an expert pretty quickly in this
Sure.
area.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And probably what we see as an NFT right now isn't going to have a lot of value 10 years in the future because business purpose, right? You know, I don't really need the NFT of my kid's drawing, in the future. Maybe they'll be a famous artist, but that's basically what an NFT is. You've digitized an image and you've digitized a profile. You've digitized, something out there. Business purpose has emerged into that market. And I think we're starting to see that NFTs becoming things like advertising tools and incentivizing tools. And so if you have a group of people that participates in this NFT market, what are the similarities there and how do we then market to those people? And can we use an NFT to then give them incentives to go out and purchase things in a different environment? So business purpose to me is what drives value here. I am a believer in Ether. That's been my favorite since the beginning, because the Ethereum platform will let you do things like smart contracts. It drives business purpose, whereas Bitcoin is really a payments token. It has one purpose. It goes back and forth and it exchanges value. I love the idea of understanding what makes something valuable. And I think that's where some of these new prospects and new things that are coming onto the market are really cool. So I don't know, that's probably a rant on that topic, but I don't know. I think it's just really a great way to get into learning more about these specific digital assets that are out there.
Yeah, no, I love what you say there because I think that's the biggest challenge oftentimes is it's like almost being afraid to ask the question or not even feel like you know enough to ask the right question, but that's okay because you're not
Yeah.
alone. And even the experts are, like you said, you do some studying and you can become an expert because there's the history is just not there. So I thought that was fantastic advice for anybody because it is almost to the point that it becomes overwhelming and you like throw your hands up because you feel like you don't even know where to start. So that's
Yeah.
okay, right?
Right. And there's so many different environments. I mean, there's a new platform emerging every day. And there's a new place there's staking out there, and there's all these different types of ways to earn money off the crypto that you hold. And it's a very interesting environment, lots of moving pieces to it, and understanding each moving piece can make or break the way that you see it for the future. And I think this is something that we will be seeing. So it's really a good way to start learning now and find those things. Or authoritative guidance is hard to sift and find. You know, there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of folks that have that hype driven philosophy behind it. But there are good tools. And so some of those tools are like the AICPA puts out. They have a digital assets practice aid. And so it talks about, what the accounting is for a lot of these things, what the auditing tools are. And BKD is lucky enough to have a person that's on that working group and helps publish that information. The IRS has been very vocal. You can go out and see exactly what they think about this, and they're going to tax an exchange as a capital gain, short term or long term. That's just the way it is right now, unless you're a miner or some other type of producer in this environment, or you're an exchange and you have some different rules that come in there. So there are authoritative tools. You got to look for them a little bit harder than just the hype that's out there.
I'm almost positive. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and say I am positive that we're going to have to continue this conversation because obviously
Yeah.
it's, it's evolving and, continuing to learn and have more. So if it's okay with you, we'll loop back and have more discussions here.
Yeah, I think that's great. There's always something new emerging. I think now that we've seen kind of the White House speak out about this, we've seen some movement from a political environment. It'll be interesting to see, do we get a central bank digital coin come out soon? Do we have other players that are more mainstream come into this? And I think the answer to that's going to be yes. And so there's going to be a lot to talk about going down the road.